Hey guys, this is part 1 of 2 of me working on my Crona fan art. Part 1 is going to be me going over the line art, and it's going to be a lot faster than part 2. I'm just going to quickly go over my sketch process and then the brushes that I used to do the line art and kind of how I went about it. And in part 2, I will be going over the coloring process, which does have a bit more to it, so it's going to be a little longer than part 1 is, but I think I was able to condense it to under 15 minutes. So if you want to know how I did the line art for this piece, go ahead and watch this. And if you want to see how I did the coloring, then be ready for part 2. So first things first, sketch. For the sketch, I decided to break it up into 2 main parts. So the first part, I go over the basic figure, where I want the head, the hand, the body to be. And I don't go that much into detail. Mind you, this picture in general is a bit more on the basic side. So I used 2 main colors for the sketch. The first sketch I did with a magenta color. After I sketched the main base of the figure, I went in with a blue. And the blue is to cover the details, and it'll stand out more than the magenta does because darker value. And I do stuff like the fingernails, the hair, eyes, clothing, stuff like that. And I'll show the magenta sketch versus the magenta and the blue. So once I got those done, I put them together you could put it in a folder or merge them and then lower the opacity. Once the opacity is lowered, now I can start going over on top with my line art. So I used 2 main brushes for the line art process. I'll put them both on screen. Now the first one is a brush that I made myself. I could put the settings somewhere else if anybody really wants, but it is a really basic brush and it's nothing super special. You could probably find a brush that does pretty much the same thing in Krita. The second brush does come in Krita. I'll also put that on screen. I can't remember the names of them right now, but names, pictures will be on the screen. The main things that I want to focus on for the line art process is 1, I wanted to have good line variation. So the line art is a bit on the sketchier side, like there's a bit of texture there, and I am using pencil brushes to do the line art, but it is still pretty solid for the most part because some parts were a bit too translucent. So what I do to kind of remedy that at the end is I do duplicate the line art layer and I just lower the opacity so that it's not too translucent and it's opaque enough for my liking, because I do want it to have a bit more of an opaque look, but I don't mind slightly more translucent areas where like there may not be as much shadow and it's touching the light. That's fine for me. That is something that you want to keep in mind when doing line art and placing your line weights properly. Anything that's in shadow or something that you want to stand out a lot more, like eyelashes for example, you'll do the line art with thicker, bolder lines, and anywhere that's in light, you want it to have a thinner line art so that kind of feels like the light's touching it more and it has a lighter feel to it. Of course, with a thicker line art, where the shadows are, it'll feel darker, right? So I just continue working on the line art, and something that's important to point out is for the process that I wanted to take with this art, I wanted it to have like a lot of separate layers so that it could overlap on top of certain colors. For example, with the hair. In the second video, I do end up making the tips of the hair a bit translucent so that you could kind of see like the skin and maybe bits of the line art, the face, and I'll point out where underneath the face is around the chin area where there's line art that I purposely put to show that will appear underneath the hair. Same thing with the ears, and I'm very purposeful about what line art is going to show underneath and what line art isn't. So I do have this separated into a bunch of different layers. The skin, anywhere that's the skin, kind of acts as its own layer. So the hand and the face, those are its own layer. The eyes are in its own layer. The hair is in its own layer. I do 2 layers, I think, for the hair because I have the front part, which I'm working on right now. Those parts I want them to have a bit of like opacity and overlap, but in the back hair, I don't want it to overlap on top of the skin and I want it to be placed underneath everything else. so I will put the back parts of the hair in its own layer. Same thing for the clothing. I put each part that I want to be in its own layer and its own layer. And those are kind of the main things that I did. Obviously, everybody has their own process. This is the process that I use for this specific piece. It doesn't always stay the same for me. I flip-flop a lot depending on what kind of style I want to do my picture in. Sometimes I'm just not a consistent person, so it just is what it is, but that's the process that I use for this piece. So the rest of it I'll just put in time lapse. It'll go super fast, and that will be the end of the video. Thanks for watching. So here's the final line art, and one last thing before the video is over. I went over a lot of these things pretty quickly, so if there's something you want me to go more in depth in for another video, you could comment that below. Again, thanks for watching, and bye.